Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context driven. Okay, so today we'll be finishing up Psalm 19, and we'll be looking at structurally the third part of this tripartite psalm, and we'll be looking at David's prayer of lament. And if you remember, the first part was the hymn of creation, second part was the praise of the Torah, and then this is David's prayer of lament as he looks at the praise of the Torah, but when he looks within, he can see his frailty. So then this is David's prayer after he understands how perfect and good and holy the law of Yahweh is. So we'll be looking at this a little more in depth as we move along. Okay, now I just mentioned that we were looking at the tripartite structural analysis of the psalm, the third part, but poetic analysis gives us a different structure for the psalm, and it definitely falls into two stanzas with two strophes each. And so here we'll be looking at the second stanza and the second strophe, which we can see here is picked up here, down here in verse 12, down here at the very bottom, this part here, this is the portion we'll be looking at. And you'll notice that in Hebrew, the versification is different, but that was because of when we look here, Lam Natzeach Mitzmor LeDavid, this is the superscription to the choir master, a psalm of David, that takes up verse 1, as you can see there in the Hebrew Bible. So you'll notice that Hebrew versification will differ from English now and then in the Hebrew Bible. And that will be because some of these psalms will have superscriptions, and where they don't, then they'll be the same. Okay, moving along. Okay. Now coming here to this last part, the macro structure here that I've given for David's prayer of lament is going to fall in with David's initial personal assessment of Yahweh's law. So after David wrote this praise of the Torah, as we saw in the previous verses, it's kind of like Paul. When the law came, he died, but he understood that the law was perfect and holy, but he was not. And so likewise, if you look at the law, it's like putting up a mirror to yourself. You're going to pick out all of your blemishes and all your errors, because when you look into the perfect law of liberty, you're going to it's going to take stock of your spiritual condition. It will create a barometer of your spiritual condition. So likewise, this is what happens to every person. When they look at the perfect law, they can understand that they don't measure up, and that's why we need Christ, because Christ is the only one who can fulfill all of these, who could fulfill the law perfectly. So that's why we rely upon His sacrifice to atone for our iniquities. So I've divided this down into like five units. So the servant's initial personal assessment of Yahweh's law is verse 12. And then David's rhetorical question and petition concerning unknown sins in verse 13. And then there's another additional petition, but it's not concerning unknown sins, but now it's concerning his presumptuousness and its effect upon him, or their effects upon him. And so this is David's second petition that concerns. So these two units here are comprehensive, and it goes from unknown sins to, I guess you would say, known sins. And so there is some type of progression there. And then the goal of David's petition is going to follow this, that he would become whole, and that he would be acquitted from a great transgression. And then lastly, David's plea to be heard is given, and this particular plea happens to be one of the best in the Bible. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, O Yahweh, my rock and my redeemer. So this is how he ends, very eloquent. And notice here that he ends with Yahweh, my Tsuri. So this you could look at this. Scholars have noticed that it ends with Yahweh, my Tsuri, referring to rock, part of the creation, going back to the first part of the psalm, the hymn of creation, and then Yahweh, my redeemer. Well, this would refer to Yahweh as one's kinsman redeemer, who's basically redeeming David from the curse of the law. So that's what scholars have said, and we'll see more of this as we move on. Okay. Now, what I wanted to do was look at this at a microstructural level, beginning here in verse 12, and we'll be looking at the disticks here. And verse 12 is going to be somewhat, I guess, somewhat antithetically related, and it states as follows. Moreover, your servant is warned by them. In keeping them, there is a great reward. So what I did here was, when we looked at this, according here to the structural analysis here in verse 12, we're going to look at a negative statement and a positive statement, the risk of possible non-compliance, and the rewards for compliance. So that's basically kind of how we can understand this particular poetic distic. And so, moreover, your servant is warned by them. And so this is David's response, obviously, to, Bahem. Here we have to take note that Bahem is referring back to the previous strophe about the praise of the law. And likewise, this particular word Bahem was also used as in the transition from, in the first stanza, about the praise of the heavens and the firmament, to the transition in the second strophe of the first stanza about the sun, in which it says, Bahem, in them he placed a tent for the sun. So likewise, this same word Bahem is used as a transition, and it reinforces the poetic structure that we're to look at these as two stanzas with two strophes within them, and this is structurally within the poetic analysis functions to assist in dividing the psalm poetically this way. And scholars would agree with this. I'm not the first one to observe this. But, okay, so moreover, your servant is warned by them. So this is David's initial personal assessment of his own spiritual condition. There is a risk of noncompliance. So he is warned by them, even though he's stating that the law is perfect and restores the soul and so on and so forth, as we saw last week. Well, David would take note as he's looking at the law and all of its commandments, that David does not personally measure up, and no one does. So we take heed that we are warned. So there is a risk of noncompliance. And likewise, but in keeping them, there is a great reward. So don't take this don't cash this in as something that is to be understood completely as financial benefits. I'm sure that it would incorporate all of that, because, as your soul prosper, Yahweh wants you to prosper as well, as John says in his letters. But there's great reward in that it's better to have a good name rather than great riches. And so it's your own personal integrity that is at display here. So the great reward is our spiritual growth and us becoming more like Christ. I mean, this is how we would look at it as a biblical theology, as a Christian reading this particular psalm. Okay. So that's just David's initial assessment. He's if you look at the law, then it provides a mirror for yourself. So when it does this, you take stock, and he saw, okay, there's risks and there's rewards in following Yahweh here, and so there you go. This is how he framed his initial assessment of himself in his prayer to Yahweh. Okay, and then moving on here to verse 13. Who can discern errors? I mean, that's just literally, and then in my translation down here, who can discern one's errors? That's probably a very good way to translate this. Who can discern one's errors? And this is plural. Shigiot is this, and this is sins of ignorance, so to speak, as that you would see back in Leviticus. But these are errors. Sins of ignorance are sins of unintentional errors. And he says, so first of all, his first thing is that now this would become underneath the heading here in verse 13, David's rhetorical question and petition concerning unknown sins. So if he begins with the question, who can understand or who can discern one's errors? So David, looking at the at all of the law and all that all of the Jews came up with what their 613 laws, and so how are you going to understand that you can err somewhere here, and so within each one, everyone's potential to err differs according to one's spiritual barometer, but nobody is without error. And this is the question. Obviously, is to be answered in the negative. No one does understand one's potential to err. And it's going to differ with each person. And in the second part of this particular distech, he calls for an acquittal, that Yahweh would acquit him or make him innocent from hidden, and I put faults, just hidden things. So down here I put secret faults or hidden faults. For things that are hidden. So there's errors, and then there are things that are hidden from us. And so David is requesting here that Yahweh would acquit him or make him innocent from things that were hidden from him. And so this would fall within these unknown and unintentional sins. And that's what verse 13 here is talking about. And when you move to verse 14 down here, then the petition, this is the second petition down here, now it takes a different turn. It's no longer unintentional, but it says, moreover, hold back your servant from presumptuous faults that are presumptuous proclivities would be another way to understand this. Everybody has some propensity within him of presumptuousness, so we all have some. We presume things, and the root word zaid or zud, however one would want to pronounce this particular verb here, it means to boil, and the noun has taken on the sense here of presumption. So it's something that one has. There's an emotional proclivity that all of us have towards that. We just think we know everything, and you act with somewhat forcefulness or some type of attitude of arrogance towards some proclivity, towards some presupposed knowledge that you have. So here, David's prayer is, and notice that David calls himself in this particular part of the psalm, your servant. So he's referring to himself as Yahweh's servant, Avdecha, right here. So he says, moreover, withhold. So this is another imperative, just like this. Nakani here is an imperative, PL imperative. This here is just a cow. But he's asking. This one here was asking for an acquittal from hidden things. In here, it's not asking for an acquittal. It's asking for to keep himself back before one has committed such a presumptuous sin. So withhold your servant from presumptuous or secret faults. Presumptuous. From presumptuous faults or inclinations. So that's what that's his prayer here. And then in the second half of this particular distich, he says, "And let them not rule over me." So this is a clear intertextual echo back to Genesis. And you can look there at the sin of Cain, where Yahweh said, you don't want this sin to rule over you, but you must rule over it. So this is a clear intertextual echo back to the Genesis narrative, and other people have brought in also the fact where this was the judgment against Eve was that your desire will be towards your husband, but he shall rule over you. And this is the same exact phrase. So people picked up on this, and of course, if you're reading Hebrew, you're going to immediately go back to the Genesis narrative and remember these two instances there, and rightfully so. But we need to take stock here that that presumptuous sins, if you fall into it or into them, because this is a plural, and that's why this verb is yimshalu is also plural. Your presumptuous sins or your presumptuous faults, they can rule over you. Like Paul said in Romans, that by whatever a man is overcome, he's also held in bondage. That's Romans 6. So this is what David is asking for, is he does not want his presumption to rule over him, and the consequences of such actions. And so David's, if you look at this prayer here, he's talking about, he understands that he's warned, there's great reward in keeping the law, and now his petitions are that he would be cleared from secret, hidden things. He wants Yahweh to acquit him from things that, obviously have already happened, of things unknown to him. So he wants everything to be cleared, and he wants. In the rhetorical question is that he wants understanding of his heirs, but he knows that we don't know everything, so we're always going to have some unknown knowledge. So likewise, this is why he would ask for acquittal from hidden faults. Okay. So this is important when we look at these two different petitions, and we should look at them very closely and see that there's a progression here from unknown sins to presumptuousness. It's somewhat of a known sin. There's enough there that you're acting in some type of proud, your pride and your forcefulness of your so-called opinion on something should be enough for you to take stock that you're moving too fast, and that you need to get a second opinion about your thoughts on something. And so your proclivities need to be checked. And that this is what David's asking for. Withhold your servant from presumptuous faults. and do not let them rule over me. Very, very good prayer. And so David is really looking. This is asking for his internal, within himself. He's asking for himself to be healthy within and without. Very, 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 very important to see this. Okay, we'll move on here. Okay, now coming to this portion, this is the goal of David's petitions. And then it says here in the latter half here of verse 14, or in your English Bible, verse 13, then I will be whole. And that would be the idea here of the Hebrew. And then the second half of this dissect, and I will be acquitted from the great transgression. So, by asking David to be cleared from hidden sins or hidden faults, and to be withheld from presumptuous, you're asking Yahweh to hold him back from presumptuous sins. Then it says that as a consequence, as the goal, then he's going to attain wholeness, and that he would be acquitted from the great transgression. So there's a rhyme and a reason and a purpose to David's prayer, and his prayer is to maintain cultic purity, so that he would be blameless. Okay, then I will be blameless, or I will be whole. And I shall be acquitted from the great transgression. And so as far as the great transgression, obviously you could take this as, scholars often noted that it's talking, that this would be idolatry, okay? But this could be murder and adultery as well. Which we know David succumbed to. We don't know exactly when in David's life he wrote this particular psalm, but I'm sure that if that after the Bathsheba incident, this would be something within his mind here, that he could understood that he blew it. And so likewise for all of us, in wherever we're at in our life, we need to be acquitted from hidden faults, and we want God to hold us back from our presumptuous inclinations. And if we pray those prayers and those petitions, so they don't rule over us, then there's an outward, there's a goal and there's a consequence to this. Then we will all, we will have integrity. You'll be whole, you'll be blameless, and then we will be acquitted from the great transgression. And that's it. And then David ends this particular psalm with a plea. And the address comes last. And then the plea breaks down here in Hebrew. May the words of my mouth be acceptable, and the meditation of my heart before you. So in English, we're going to put this together. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart become acceptable before you. So it's kind of the way English would organize this is different than it is written in Hebrew, but the idea would be is the same here, and you can see how the distich is formed, and in Hebrew it makes perfect sense. The way the words are mise en page. So David here, this ratzon, this is sacrificial language. So when you come to Yahweh with your sacrifice, you want it to be acceptable, right? Remember Paul in Romans 12 that we present ourselves to Yahweh or to God with acceptable, which is our reasonable service of worship. So acceptable means that you're not bringing a blemished lamb or a blemished ram for your sacrifice. That's just the material aspect of your of the sacrificial victim. But then there has to be an internal disposition that the petitioner also has to come with a humble heart. So you can understand David's prayer is asking him to be cleared from his hidden faults, and that he's asking Yahweh to hold him back from his presumptuous nature. So if we're making that kind of prayer, then our prayer will become acceptable to Yahweh. So notice here that that this particular dissect, the first one, may the words or the speech of my mouth be acceptable. So he's looking here at the plea for spoken words. And then here in the second distich, it's the meditation of his heart. So these are the unspoken words. So when you analyze these distichs, it's just not by happen chance this happens. This is that's why it's so important to read each distich and each verset of these distichs or tristichs, and this here is a tristic here. So these two versets here are loaded with they're information rich, and you can tell. And in this particular tristic, how the psalm ends, it ends with this plea. O Yahweh, my rock and my redeemer. And so people have noticed that the rock refers to creation, and the redeemer would be Yahweh redeeming him from the curse of the law, and for his prayer here. So looking at the major parts of the psalm of the hymn of creation and the praise of the law. So this would all wash out here at the end. And tie the whole thing together. But looking at Yahweh as my rock, so a rock is something that's immovable. Yahweh's not changing. He's solid. He's steady. He's always there. And so it brings us great comfort that Yahweh is our rock, our massive rock, and that our trust in Yahweh can be sure because he cannot be moved, and that Yahweh is our Redeemer. He redeems us from the curse of the law. So that's his prayer here, and I would suggest that this is something that we could all agree with, that when we agree with that the law of God is perfect and holy and pure, but when you look at it and we look at ourselves, well, we're a mess. So that's why we turn to Yeshua, who is you can say Yehovah or Yahweh. He is our kinsman redeemer and redeems us from the curse of the law. Okay, I hope that this has been a beneficial study. Psalm 19 was a very important psalm, looking at the creation theology, and then looking at the at the wisdom of Torah, and then David's prayer. And so David's prayer naturally it's how he responds to the praise of the law. So it's just David taking stock of himself, and that would be good for us. So Lord, we ask that we would understand, God, that we're all warned, and that there is great reward in keeping the law, your commandments. And God, we do ask you to help us to understand and discern our errors, and God, acquit us from hidden faults and withhold us from our presumptuous nature. God, let it not rule over us, so that we would be whole, we'd be blameless, and that we would be acquitted from the great transgression.